appropriate because he's a Bexley kid who has gone on to do great things. And we are so glad to have him here. Jason Block is with us. But before we do that, let's recognize a couple of people here to begin with. And Elaine, if you don't mind, if you could just jump on and say a little bit about the Chamber and this series in particular.
I'm happy to. Kevin, thank you so much. As all of you know who are here, Bexley is great for such a multitude of reasons. We can't count them all. But of course, one of them is the amazing talent that's hidden in plain sight. And we consider Jason Block one of those hidden gems. We built this local leader series to highlight those individuals and their experiential knowledge, and obviously to share it with you. We're thrilled that you're all here today. For those of you who don't know the Chamber, who weren't members and who are joining one of our events for the first time, a special welcome. And we hope you'll reach out to us, check out our website for upcoming events. We always have many of those to engage the community as well as our members. We'd love to share with you how the Chamber supports area businesses, the community, and much more. And with that in mind, we also want to say how incredibly grateful we are to have Solar Insurance here today as our series sponsor. They really help make this happen. And to bring Jason Block to you as today's speaker. Lastly, I want to add that proceeds from your ticket sales after our expenses are being contributed to a charity of Jason's choice, and he has selected the wonderful Bexley Community Foundation. So we're thrilled to do that in his name. And with that, thank you.
Thanks, Elaine. It has been, I can tell you on behalf of the board and members of the Chamber, it is one of our go-tos for information, help, and benefits and all the things that they offer. So we hope that you'll take a look at that at the Bexley area website, Bexley Area Chamber website. Next up, and to introduce himself and tell us why he chose to sponsor this event today is Brent Solar of Solar Insurance Agency. Brent, there he is. Just talk a little bit about, well, first of all, thank you. But talk about yourself and a little bit about why you thought this was a good idea to join in on this series with us.
Well, thanks, Kevin. I appreciate it. And thank you, Jason and Elaine. I'm Brent Solar, president of Solar Insurance Agency, and it's an honor for Solar Insurance to sponsor the Bexley Area Chamber of Commerce Local Leader Series. Throughout our 3 generations of providing commercial, employee benefit, life, health, home, auto, and specialty insurance to the Bexley area, we have had the privilege of working with many of the area's leaders and entrepreneurs over those years. The Leader Series will exemplify what makes working in this special community so great. And I'm sure we're in for a great conversation with Jason about his leadership journey. So I invite any of you to reach out to me and my team for insurance or financial needs, but just an honor to do this, and I'll turn it back to Kevin to start the show.
Well, thanks again, Brent. It's folks like you that allow us to do this and also allow us to make that contribution to the Bexley Education Foundation at Jason's direction today. It's just a win-win for everyone all around. So time now to talk to our guest speaker. We'll let him, he's the reason you're here. So let's get him involved right away. And Jason, the thing that I think is fascinating in looking at your background is you grew up in a family that ran a business in Bexley, runs a business at Bexley. I want you to talk about that. But then you were able to really go in after law school to go and work for some developers, but then jumped right into some small businesses that have grown, started a business, co-founded a business yourself in Interspace, and then end up as the CEO of Brewdog USA. It's quite a background for someone of such tender years as you. But I think you've been thrown in at a time with the pandemic that business cycles have just been upended. So we're interested to hear about that. But first, tell us, give us your background, especially the tie to Bexley, and talk to us about how to set you up to be a leader in our community.
Sure, and thank you for having me, Kevin, Elaine, and Brent. Appreciate it. Very humbling that people would buy a ticket to this. It is going to charity, but very, very nice that people would do that. I can't see any of the attendees, so it's possible my mom just bought a bunch of tickets, which, you know, it's better that I don't know, I suppose. So thank you everyone for being here and having some interest. Happy to share, you know, the backstory and kind of how I got to where I am. It did start in Columbus. I moved to Bexley when I was entering high school. I graduated from Bexley High School. I currently live in Bexley, but before that happened, I went to law school. I started my career out of law school, working in real estate development for Schiff Capital Group. Mike Schiff started that business. I joined very early on once he did and learned a lot very, very quickly. He moves fast and likes to have a full plate. So it was very much sink or swim and learned a lot throughout that experience and was fortunate from there to jump into some of the businesses that you mentioned, Kevin. And I actually have just a short slideshow to give an overview and maybe answer some questions for people who aren't as familiar with Brewdog, who we are and what we do. I'm gonna go ahead and share that. All right, can people see my screen?
There you go.
All right, perfect. So first, I'll start with Homage. I started there in 2012. That is me flexing. I'm not flexing hard. That's why you can't see the muscles. They're there. But I started Homage in 2012. Homage was founded by Ryan Vessler, who's sitting on top of that van. I've known Ryan growing up. We went to Columbus Academy together in middle school and just stayed in touch after that. And I was just a big fan of Homage and what he was doing. And after I finished law school, once I was in real estate development, I had a lot of interest in entering a more traditional business role. And fortunately for me, Ryan provided that opportunity. And when I joined there, Ryan was very focused on the creative and really what makes Homage so special. Just the authenticity to the stories they tell and the quality of the garments they sell, but a lot of just the business pieces of what became important for Homage's future is something that he tapped me to help with. So I was the president of Homage for about 6 years. In my time there, really what we were focused on, what I was focused on, was how to grow and support that growth. From growing the e-commerce business to growing the licensing relationships. You know, Homage was really, timing was great in starting to work with Ohio State, but turning our focus to some more national partnerships, from the NBA to the MLB to colleges around the country to WWE, World Wrestling. Those were all things that we worked on when I was there. We also added some brick and mortar stores. We improved our sourcing and supply chain, and we had to build the team and find the funds to support that growth. So we did have a couple rounds of funding, the bigger being from Express. It's probably been about 5 years now, and really felt like we made some big changes that were positive for the business in my time there. In about 2018, realized that I was ready for my next chapter, and I think Homage was ready for some changes as well. So I talked to Ryan and really positioned myself to leave. And after about 6 months of working through that, I left and founded a company with Brett Kaufman called Interspace, which essentially is a co-working space specifically for mental health and wellness professionals. People hear co-working, it's pretty pervasive. It exists a lot of places. What made this different is normally co-working is set up for people to be collaborative and have transparent, open working spaces. Well, if I'm going to see a therapist or some type of mental health or wellness practitioner, those things don't really work well. Privacy, discretion, those things are more important. So it was taking a model that was really successful to a group of individuals who we thought would work well with it, but the physical spaces weren't set up for them. At about the 11th hour before we hit go, I was approached by about an opportunity at Brewdog. At that point in time, it was a really difficult decision on whether to continue focusing on Interspace or to join Brewdog. Obviously, I made the decision to join. With hindsight being 2020, I feel like that was the right decision. We would have been launching a physical space business right at the start of 2020. We all know now what happened in the preceding or following months, and not that it was an easy transition at Brewdog, but starting a new business based on people physically coming to a space probably would have been a difficult go early in 2020. So a little bit about Brewdog. Sorry, Kevin, did you say something? No, I'm hearing things. Okay.
No, I did not. I'm sorry.
That's all right. That was me. So Brewdog is a global craft beer business. So just a quick overview for those not familiar. We are the largest craft brewer in the world. We have 110 craft beer bars worldwide. Our funding model is unique. We have over 200,000 investors, and we're not publicly traded, so you can buy shares of Brewdog directly from Brewdog. And we have 4 breweries. We are based in Scotland, so the first brewery is in Ellon. The second is here in Canal Winchester, just outside of Columbus. We also have a brewery in Berlin, Germany, and one in Brisbane, Australia. A little bit about the US business. So in 2020, we were the fastest growing craft brewer in the US. Our facility here in Canal, it's 100,000 square feet. We have a lot of capacity and can really grow with the infrastructure that's in place. We also have on our campus the world's first craft beer hotel, the Doghouse, which was interesting through COVID, but has been a real bright spot and success story for us. And we have either in the works or open 10 US craft beer bars. We have 3 here in Columbus, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, Pittsburgh, with Cleveland, Las Vegas, Atlanta, and New Albany all on the way. I mentioned this a little bit already, but we also are the world's largest alcohol-free or NA, non-alcoholic craft brewer. It's a huge growing part of our business. We are the world's largest craft beer chain. And throughout our channels, we have 1.2 million social media followers. Brewdog was started in 2007 by James Watt and Martin Dickey, who are in this picture here. It started in a garage. Homage started in a basement. James is still the global CEO, so we're still founder-led. So there's definitely some similarities from my previous experiences there. And the mission for Brewdog is to make other people as passionate about craft beer as we are, and to do that all over the world. And that's something that has been happening over the years, and something that we continue to work on today. Just a little bit about our culture. We make things we love ourselves from scratch. That goes both for our beer and for the food that we serve in our bars. We are community owned. I mentioned the 200,000 investors, and we are independent. And in the beer world, that essentially means not being owned by one of the 10 large global beer companies. We believe in being a great employer, and we want to show that business can be a force for good. And then just to put a little bit more to it, the products that we make here, so Punk IPA, that is the beer that started it all. That is our biggest beer globally. That said, Elvis Juice is the best seller in the US by far. That's a grapefruit infused IPA. And this up here, these are some of our headliners. So our more popular beers, Hazy Jane, Clockwork Tangerine, and Lightspeed. So that's just a little bit of the backstory. I was going to talk about how we were impacted by COVID and what that actually meant to our business. When the shutdown happened, so this is just a chart of our bar business in the US. You can see how quickly it cratered. 70% of our revenue at Brewdog dried up overnight. That's not just from our bars, but we also sell kegs to a lot of other people's bars. If you go to bars around Columbus, you can find Elvis Juice or Hazy Jane or any of our other beers, and all of that business evaporated overnight. The one piece of business that really was left for us was our off-premise or our grocery sales. What we didn't know at the time of the closure was how that was going to pick up, or if that was going to pick up. So we had to very quickly, and this wasn't a US issue, this was a global Brewdog issue. We had to react really, really dramatically, and that included furloughing 80% of our team. We have a ton of people that are employed in our bars and restaurants, and that's really where those hit the hardest. I started at Brewdog really in January of 2020, and it was middle of March where all of this happened. So it really, I was learning about the business, getting my bearings, and then there was a really dramatic shift that everyone went through in different ways. Looking for some silver linings, I was able to get to know the management and leadership team, both in the US and globally, probably far faster and better than I would have otherwise. We were really in the foxhole having to deal with some dramatic decisions and circumstances, and it allowed us to get to know each other a lot better, a lot faster, and definitely feel like there are some benefits from that. In terms of where 2020 ended, what you can see here, the map on the right, so the blue states are the states that we distributed in through the end of 2019. The yellow are the states that we distributed in or that we added through 2020, and the green are the states that we are actively working on adding now. So our brands grew throughout the year: Elvis, Hazy Jane, Mixed Pack. And I think it's good to keep in mind, those grew with so much of our business channels disappearing. So the fact that the business as a whole grew through one channel, it just shows how much heavy lifting we were having to do through grocery stores. And it really did spike pretty dramatically. And we're fortunate for that, because if that hadn't happened for the US and our global business, we would have been in some real trouble, just because we weren't planning for any of this to happen, obviously. We saw a lot of success in just the larger pack format. This speaks to kind of some trends in society. People are buying 12 packs more than 6 packs. It was something that, the hoarding that you heard a lot about with toilet paper, it extended to other grocery store items as well. So we saw a lot of success there. What ended up happening was we were the US's fastest growing craft brewery in 2020. We went from number 66 in 2019 to number 41 in 2020. So it's hard to tell throughout the year how you're doing relative to others. But when they published the results in March of this year, we were really pleased to see that we weathered the storm probably as well as we could have. I'm sure there are things we could have done better, but we were really pleased with how the year shook out for us. In terms of 2021, what we're focused on, what we're excited about, how we're really planning to continue that trajectory that we were able to have some success with in 2020, getting our retail spots reopened. I mean, that is a hugely important part of our business, and one that was hit very hard. I mean, we closed retail, and for us that means bar, a couple times throughout the year, just as COVID spiked. They are now open. Getting them back up to full strength is going to take time and be a process, but it's something that we're definitely seeing some positive momentum. Opening some new locations, I mentioned that at the start. We've been focused regionally since Brewdog existed in the US. We want to expand that. Las Vegas might seem like a bit of an oddball, and in many ways it is, given our existing footprint, but that's a global brand statement for us, not just for the US business, but for the global business as a whole. It is a iconic destination that sees a ton of tourists. Signage, being on the strip, it's all part of a bigger strategy, but something that we hope really helps build momentum and fuels our expansion across the US. Also opening another location in Columbus, in New Albany, opening in Cleveland. So big, iconic 10,000 square foot brew pub locations is really where we're focused. And why bars are so important to us, it allows us to deliver a full experience. We're really proud of our beer, how we make it, what goes into it, what makes it special, and we can provide a full experience around it within our own bars in a way that it's hard to replicate in other people's bars. We're doubling down on digital. We had a lot of success last year adding an Amazon channel and having direct to consumer for our beer. E-commerce is a little challenging with beer just because there's a lot of laws at play, but we play in that space as much as we're able to, and have grown that and look to continue growing that throughout the year. And then we looked at that map a little bit ago, but really having our distribution footprint geographically expand is a big part of our strategy. If we're going to try and make these larger moves, Las Vegas being one of them, making sure people can buy our beer within their market has to come hand in hand with that. So I'm going to stop sharing now, but really just wanted to provide a bit of background and explain what we do before we get into some questions that people might have and having a bit more of a conversation.
Well, one of the first things that's come up, because obviously you've been a leader at 3 different companies here now, what character, and this comes from Leslie Albright at our firm of Albright Weicker, where I am a small business attorney. I've got to get, it's a shameless plug, I'm sorry. Okay, are there certain character traits you look for in company leaders or your executive team?
Yeah, well, first I'll say hi, Leslie. Leslie and I went to law school together, and I'm also a client of Albright Weicker, so I'll endorse that plug that you threw out. You know, it's something that I think there's a few qualities that I look for. We have a complicated business. Legally, there's a lot of challenges. We have a lot of different lines of businesses. I mentioned bars, distributions, marketing, e-commerce, production, supply chain. There's just a lot of different elements at play, and looking for people who are problem solvers and don't come to conversations with the issues that they're having without some strategies and thoughts as to how they're going to address those or what we can be doing. You know, the cliche, 2 heads are better than 1. I mean, that is true. As a team, we discuss these problems. It's not on everyone to fix all of these on their own, but really, if you do have an issue, bring all the facts to the table and some potential outcomes. As a group, we will generally get to the right place, and great ideas come from people around the table, but not putting, you know, it's an expression I've heard from others, putting your monkey on other people's back. You have to be prepared to come with solutions and then really carrying those out. That makes it just everyone's accountable for their own area of business, and that's something that we look for here. Resilience. Problems come up all the time, regardless of what business you're in. I mean, if you are trying to grow and do things differently, even if you've really nailed how to do it, well, your growth is going to bring future problems down the pipeline. You know, what worked for a smaller business generally doesn't work for a larger business. So having people who are resilient and understand that this is a constant evolution, and you know, problems or issues or challenges aren't bad things. They're opportunities to do things differently or better. People who are willing to listen before they really are willing to speak. And that's not to say that you can't offer your opinion by any means, but you generally learn a whole lot more from listening, whether that's from your team members, from your colleagues. Listening first is something that I appreciate in team members and something that I try to emulate with our team. And, you know, working in 2 founder-led entrepreneurial businesses at Brewdog, at Homage, you know, at Shift Capital before that, I think founders by their nature, at least in my experience, they like to push. It's personal. I mean, this is something that they birthed and they want to see come to fruition. It's in their nature to push the business and push the limits to try and get to a more ideal state. And it's really easy to talk about all the reasons why you can't do things, or why it's not worth the hassle of pushing to get to that next stage, whatever that might be. And I think a much healthier place to work in growth businesses and work with founders and work with your teams is for people to start with yes. And if there is some crazy idea that's put on the table, there's probably a ton of reasons to say why that doesn't make sense or you shouldn't do it. But to start with, we can if, or let's do that, but here's what we need to do for that to happen. And sometimes the things that follow the if make it an easy decision to not do it. That's not to say that you should say yes to everything. But I think coming at those questions and challenges with a little bit of optimism and what it would take to execute it, in my experience, leads to a much healthier conversation on how to take on those challenges and what it's going to take to be successful if you do. So a bit of a rambling list, but those are some things that I'd say over my career where I see people excel and becoming leaders themselves, or if they pick up those pieces and try and take those to their teams.
No, it's a good list. So thank you. Next up is Mike Maltz from Bexley Bed and Breakfast. He's got a two-parter. The first part may be the easiest. What is your favorite beer? Before you answer that, who's your biggest competitor? Are they big brewers or small craft brewers? So first, your favorite beer.
Well, it's got to be a Brewdog beer. So I would say my go-to right now is Lightspeed. It's a low-calorie, hazy IPA. It's really good. It's got like some apricot fruit in it as well. So if you haven't tried it, I recommend that. If I'm not having our beer, I like Bell's. They make a great hazy called Official. And locally, I would say they're a competitor, but I have to give them a lot of credit. CBC, Columbus Brewing Company, does an amazing job with CBC IPA. I think their quality is always top notch. So if you're looking to try some things, those are some good ones. Who are competitors? Well, when we talk about being like the largest craft brewer in the world, Brewdog's base of business is largely in Europe. That is where we started. That's where we have the most penetration. That's where we have the most bars. That's where we sell the most beer. And the US really led the world in the craft beer revolution. And what the craft beer revolution really means is, historically around the world, it was these larger brewers like a Budweiser, like a Miller, like a Heineken, like a Sapporo, just based in different places throughout the world, that sold kind of at mass, and that's just what people drank. And in like the late 80s, early 90s, there was a movement to get back to the craft of like how to make great beer. And in the US, that was led by Sierra Nevada and Sam Adams and New Albion and some other brewers that really kind of brought that artistry back. And what has happened really since the 90s to today is craft beer in the US has exploded. There's 8,000 breweries. Pre-pandemic, they were opening up, it felt like daily, but certainly weekly. And, tap rooms and local breweries have become part of the fabric of communities across the country. Well, what our founders, James and Martin, saw when they were traveling the US in the early 2000s was, these are great. I mean, why doesn't beer like this exist in Europe? And so what Brewdog essentially is it's the Sierra Nevada or the Sam Adams of craft beer within Europe. So, while we were a little late to the craft beer revolution in the US, they really were at the forefront of it in Europe. And we are part of one business, but who the competitors are for Brewdog in Europe are going to be a little bit different than who they are in the US, just given where we are within our own life cycle. So I would say in Europe, we are looking to the Heinekens, the Carlsberg, the Peronis. I mean, beers that are of national scale in the US, but certainly within Europe where they're based. They're not as big as those brands are, but they are growing really quickly and catching up. In the US, I'd say it is much more regionally focused currently. Great Lakes, Rheingeist, I mentioned Bell's. We're really trying to gain steam and grow within the craft space. We aren't looking at, taking over Budweiser or Miller next year. That's a very different segment of beer within the US. So, it's answered a little bit differently depending upon where we are geographically, but, and I think it even goes down to a market level. I mentioned CBC. I mean, in Columbus, I'd say that CBC is our biggest competitor. I wouldn't say that outside of Columbus, but you really do have to be very focused within markets on who your competition is and what they're doing and what consumers are looking for.
Thanks for that. And then thanks for the question, Mike. Jeff Coleman asks, if you could do your career all over again, would you still go to law school? And if so, would you talk about how that affects your career?
So I went to law school with Jeff, and I wouldn't know him if I hadn't had that experience. So I don't know if that's a trick question, but yeah, I absolutely would go to law school again, even though I don't practice law. I mean, from my first career my first job outside of law school was working in real estate development and investments. That legal training was critical because one of the things I took from law school is it's empowering in the sense that, before I went to law school, you pick up a contract and it feels like a foreign language and you don't know what really matters and what's boilerplate or what's material to any type of relationship that agreement is trying to control. When I started in real estate, if I had been handed these contracts or leases or purchase agreements without that experience and without that confidence that this is just another person putting words on a page and, understanding, not that I was an expert by any means, but having just a little bit of confidence on what it took to play in that legal space, I don't think I would have been successful there. I also wouldn't have gotten that job. Moving into Homage's bread and butter is licensed apparel. And so not everything, but a huge piece of what they sell, you're selling other people's intellectual property. And behind all of that is an agreement, a negotiation, legal aspects. So, I mean, the law was very much part of what we did there. Not necessarily day in and day out, but it was a big part of it from a broader sense. And then moving into beer, every state has alcohol laws here. So you're not operating in a country with just complicated laws. You're essentially operating with 50 countries plus federal laws and the 3-tier system. I mean, it's a very, very regulated industry. I would say probably the most regulated in the US. And, the challenges that come into play that you have to solve from a business perspective have legal undertones constantly. So I would absolutely do law school again. I guess to dive into that question even further, I didn't really apply myself until I got to law school. Undergrad was something that I enjoyed myself while I was there. I made a lot of mistakes. I'm lucky I got into law school, given how my undergrad experience went. But it was where I really forced myself to work hard, and I was able to find out what I can do. And I mentioned the empowering piece. I also earlier mentioned the resilience. I think a huge part of being an attorney is knowing just you've got to grind it out and how you prioritize your day when you've got 10 different things coming at you. What has to get done now? Those are things that I definitely learned in law school, and I don't think I would be able to handle as well today without that experience. I also met Jeff, to come back to where the question started. So
yeah, just to bring it back full circle.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as a person that I've run a couple of businesses as well, and law school education was invaluable. So I agree with everything you said. From Jennifer,
I could do without the loans, but that aside.
Yeah, no, right. No. I completely understand that. Jennifer Macker, and again, I hope I'm saying that last name right. Jason Have you had any trouble with staffing due to the pandemic as you are looking to open some of your new locations?
Absolutely. Our biggest challenge right now is staffing our bars, specifically back of house. And, that's our line, our line cooks, even front of house servers, bartenders, food runners. It has been incredibly challenging. I think it's an issue that exists on a couple fronts. One, a lot of people, it was such a roller coaster. I mean, we closed our bars in March of last year. We reopened them in June. We closed them again in December. And in between then, it was with a ton of restrictions, and it was challenging. And I genuinely feel for people who worked in our bars because it was hard, and they were on the front lines. And it was mentally taxing and exhausting. And I think a lot of people who were in the service industry pre-pandemic, they just don't want to go back to it. And whether that's current fears of COVID, which are totally reasonable and rational, or just the scar tissue from what the past year brought to people who worked in that space, I get it. So I think there's just less people who were in that sector who are willing to come back. And then I think with the current unemployment setup and additional benefits that exist, it has been challenging. And, adding more pay is not something that we're adverse to. We have increased our pay more so than we've ever done. And we're still having trouble, not just even hiring people. People apply and they don't show up for interviews. It is tough. And talking to other people that operate retail bars, restaurants like we do, this is a challenge that others are feeling. And I think it's just going to take some time to get back to where things were. And, I've had others ask, we don't have a silver bullet by any means. So it's something that we're struggling with, and we're trying to make the most of, but I think it's going to be a challenge for the next 6+ months.
Yeah, that's certainly what we've seen as well. Betsy Waterman wants to know, shifting the focus a little bit, can you talk about your new location in Las Vegas? She saw a rendering and thought it looked amazing. How did you select that particular site?
Well, I'll start with the site selection. So, I try and think about things just being part of a international business. What's the equivalent? Like, what's Europe's equivalent of New York? Paris, London, there's a couple. What's their equivalent of like a vacation destination? There are parts of Spain or Ibiza, and we would say Florida or California. Well, what's Europe's equivalent for Vegas? It's Vegas, especially in the UK. When, talking to my counterparts there, friends that I have there, like jumping on a plane and going to Vegas, it seems like it's far, and it is far, but that's still where they go for that experience. So we were really challenged at the global level to find kind of a icon destinations. In the middle of the pandemic, we opened a location in Shanghai. That was one of the icon destinations that we had identified. But looking for a Vegas location was a global initiative for us as well. And it kind of serves a similar purpose that like a Times Square location would have, except it's really challenging to make money in Times Square, just given where those rents are. Vegas kind of can scratch some of that same itch with its high visibility, tons of tourists, but it's also, from a rent perspective, more doable, and like the traffic and business that can support it is generally, I don't want to say easy, but easier to achieve. Vegas also doesn't have a single brew pub on the Strip. Take that back. There's one inside of a hotel, but not that has kind of an external entrance like what we're doing. And it's just an opportunity for us to make a statement as a business. It helps us grow our West Coast distribution. Having a brick and mortar is really, really impactful. So there are some kind of halo benefits to other lines of business for us. And it's a rooftop. So, once we found that location on the strip, it just felt right. It's one that when he visited, he was more excited about that location than any location he's ever seen. So it just kind of felt right from the start. In terms of what that location will be, renderings are always kind of your ideal outcome. So we're still working through final plans. We hope that they look a lot like the renderings, that they will look a lot like it, but there will be some differences. From having a rooftop pool to having an actual brew kit where we make beer in Vegas to, we are the world's first carbon negative brewery. So for every bit of carbon as a business we put into the world, we take out twice as much. We do that largely through planting trees and through our own sustainability practices. So having it be Vegas's first carbon negative bar is a big part of our goals there as well. Having a beer school. One of the things that Brewdog does is we are the world's largest employer of cicerones. A cicerone is really the beer equivalent of a sommelier. So, if you join Brewdog, we will pay for your testing and your training to become a level 1 cicerone. And we will give people a bonus if they achieve getting that certification. But we will also host a beer school at that Vegas location where others, if you're just our customer, you can be or learn to be a cicerone as well. But really high on experience. Having a unique Elvis beer. I mentioned Elvis juice being our US bestseller. The Elvis kind of organic tie-ins to Vegas are right there in front of us as well. Having an event space. So we hope it's a lot of different things for us. We're excited about it. And really, we hope it's kind of the first step into being a more national player and less so of purely a regional player in craft beer.
Yeah, it does look amazing. So I hope you get close to that rendering when all is said and done. RK has a more personal question for you. Aside from profit-related indicators, when do you feel successful as a CEO?
That's a good question. And if I make assumptions on who RK is, a very, very on-brand question from her. So, for me, it generally starts with the team. How does the team feel about what we're doing as a business, how they're growing within the business, and their thoughts and perceptions of us as a company? You spend as much time as work generally as you do at home, at least a lot of people do. And to have a workplace that people genuinely feel good about for themselves and for the impact that the business is making, that is something that weighs heavily on me. And I think that leads to long-term success. There are different ways you can take a pulse on that, whether it's through internal surveys or just making sure you talk to your team routinely and having them providing opportunities for them to provide feedback about the business, about the leadership of the business, about the initiatives that the business is working on. So I think the team aspect is hugely important. And if that isn't right, that profit piece isn't going to be there. I'll also go back to there was a slide just in talking about our culture. And the last piece was business being a force for good. What does that mean? For us, we are determined to be the world's most sustainable drinks company and ultimately the world's most sustainable company. The impact of global warming and what that is doing in places all over the world is something that we take incredibly seriously. A lot of brands will put out there that by 2040, we're going to do X or Y. We wanted to say we are going to be carbon negative as of now. And in 2020, we did that. And it's because we just don't think that is the luxury of time for us to wait on that. So how we're doing on those sustainability efforts is something that we talk about regularly as well. And that's not to say that we're done or we figured it out. We have a lot of opportunities, but we're very, very committed to how we tackle those challenges.
Jeff Storer asks, can you talk about the impact of Brewdog's supply chain throughout 2020 and the strategies that you've used to overcome worldwide shortages?
Yeah, and hi, Jeff. I would, it definitely, it hit us in a number of ways. So I mentioned how grocery sales went through the roof. Well, that wasn't just for Brewdog, that was for anyone that sells beer or anyone that sells anything. The global supply chain for cans was not set up to have 15% more cans than they did the year prior. It's a commodity-based business that operates on efficiencies and how they optimize their factories. And year to year, they can increase their supply by a couple percentage points, but not double digits. That's just not how the industry is set up. So I took a week off in August last summer just to spend some time with my family. And as a general rule, whenever I take time off is when shit hits the fan. And so I remember getting the phone call that week in August that, we just got a call from our can supplier that we're not going to get any cans. Well, that means we're not going to sell any beer. I mean, it was kind of like a huge problem that would have had a massive impact on us. Fortunately, we were able to work through it and we didn't run out of cans. We had to get creative and work through other suppliers, but we are still feeling those issues today. I mean, every month when we get our, what they're able to supply us, whether it's from cans or whether it's from cardboard packaging and boxes for beer, there are huge constraints on the industry that aren't Brewdog problems, that are really larger global problems. Shipping and freight is through the roof currently. We're paying double to ship beer to our distributors than what we were at this time last year. And that's just from all of the supply and demand changes that have happened. And then also timing. When we see a spike in demand, there's a month-long process to brewing a beer, let alone getting those ingredients in our door. If people miss, things are a couple weeks late, that has a huge ripple effect for what we do. So yeah, we're definitely continuing to work through a lot of supply challenges. And I think that it's a problem that builds on itself because I'm sure we're not alone in this, but are we buying a few extra cans than what we need every month just to kind of build a buffer? And in case they tell us we're not going to get enough, we're positioned to weather that? Yeah, we are. I'm sure other people are. So there is that element of, people are being a little bit defensive and probably furthering the problem, but one that I think we feel like is being done out of necessity. So we don't see that changing, at least through the end of this year. We think that just the supply chain is going to continue to be stressed, and we're going to have to continue working through challenges for at least the next 8 months.
Yeah, I get the feeling that these challenges are being felt globally and will be for a while. Jessica Sod asks, it can be lonely at the top. Who are your business influencers and mentors?
That's a good question. Yeah, I've been fortunate throughout my career to work with a lot of people who have been really influential and that I still have good relationships with to this day. At Homage, there was Ryan and Steve Werman. At Schiff Capital, I worked closely with Mike Schiff, who founded that business. I was fortunate to meet John Lowe, who's the CEO of Jenny's and has been a good friend and mentor for years, and really helped through some challenging situations. but I'm also someone, generally wear things on my sleeve. So whether it's with my team or with my friends, many of which are on this call and some of which have asked questions, to just share, what I'm going through and to get their perspective. And I think what's important for me is, I guess it's twofold. One, it's not bottling things up. If something's on my mind, to talk about it, whether that's with a personal or professional friend or mentor, but also drawing lines. Like I try and really unplug and be present. And I'm not always successful with this by any means, but I attempt to be present with my family and in my personal life as much as possible. I have to remind myself, I've got 3 kids, 5, 3, and 7 months. And it's a grind. I mean, getting them ready and out the door and to school, like it's hard, but it is flying by. And I know it's a cliche, but appreciating those moments for what they are. So if I'm able to do that, that generally gives me some balance and allows me to remind myself at the end of the day, we're just selling beer. And, that's not to minimize the challenges of work or what we're trying to accomplish here, but it's perspective that helps me hopefully remain calm and provide stability to the team here, because oftentimes I find in my role that that stability can cascade out to the team. And if I'm in a frenzy and very tense about something, it's generally absorbed by others. So I try not to do that.
I got a question about someone would like me to ask you about equity for punks, your investment strategy.
Sure. So what equity for punks is, a good way to explain it, in the US, most people have heard of Kickstarter. So essentially a company or someone with an idea will say, hey, I want to open this business or create this product, and I want to raise this much money. And the more money you raise, we'll give you different levels of perk. Usually for the lowest level, you'll get the product when it's available. And for higher levels, they'll give you crazy experiences, or you'll get a gold-plated model. Well, what existed in Europe and the UK far before it existed in the US was equity crowdfunding. So essentially taking that Kickstarter model, but having it be, so instead of donating money, you're actually buying shares of a business. So as the story goes, Brewdog in Europe hit a ceiling where they had more demand than for the amount of capital they were able to infuse in the business to support it. And they had really exhausted traditional bank financing. Their lenders said, like, we're tapped out, even though business is growing, we're not giving you any more. So what they did was they created Equity for Punks. And that is a equity crowdfunding platform where they reached out to people in the community and said, if you want to own shares in what we're doing, we're selling them directly. And if you buy 1 share, you get a discount for life at our bars. If you buy 100, you get to make your own beer at the brewery. And there were different levels. And that was something that Brewdog had a lot of success with in Europe. Well, in 2015, or right around there, the laws changed in the US because that was illegal. That wasn't something that could even be done. If you wanted to sell shares publicly, it had to be done on a stock exchange. Well, when that change was made in the US, that program extended to the US as well. And so over the past 10 years, Brewdog has over 200,000 investors, about 20,000 of which are from the US. We've raised well over $100 million through the different rounds of funding. And not only has that money been able to fuel our growth, and if anyone's ever been to our brewery here or any brewery, everything in it is incredibly expensive. I mean, like, you point to something and it's 6 figures. It's really, really capital intensive. So to open a brewery in the US or expand capacity in Europe, a lot of capital is needed, and so is it to open bars. But what's really unique about the program is these aren't just shareholders. Like, there is an emotional element to this, that people feel like they're part of a club and they are passionate about our beer, and they really become brand evangelists and ambassadors. And I think that's been the best part of the program, better than the capital that's come into the business, but the amounts of fans and people that are singing our praises throughout the globe and introducing others to our product. It's been just a really engaged community, and one that helps grow our business in many ways.
You know, I for those keeping it score, the change in the law was Regulation A that allowed the equity for punks. It allowed that to be able to work. So I had to get that in there. I apologize for that. How do you keep your team, again, from the folks at Albar Weicker, how do you keep your team and employees motivated and passionate about the brand?
I will say that in 2020, that was harder to do than any time ever. You know, a lot of times you can, having opportunities for teams to engage in person, appreciation, parties, whatever you want to call them, you know, those were totally wiped off the table. But so were the just in-office water cooler interactions. You know, for a long time, it was me and one other person essentially coming into the office. There were people in the brewery and then people in the bars when those reopened, but there were very few people here physically. And without, you know, everyone's used to Zoom now and all the different ways to interact remotely, but kind of those casual sidebar conversations, like they don't happen as frequently. And it was really challenging throughout the year. I think that's some good things that you can always do is communicate. You know, I'm in a seat where I'm aware of all the things we're working on all the time, and it's easy for me to forget that other people don't know about it. So making sure whatever you're working on or whatever your goals are, whatever strategies you're going to try and work towards, you share those so people understand there is a vision, there is thought to what we're doing. There is a next phase if we do this right. I think finding ways to show appreciation routinely. You know, we do monthly a Top Dog Award. We did do kind of an annual team COVID style event this year where we gave out a number of awards and recognitions. It's making sure you're getting their feedback. I think more often than not, the want for people to be heard is really, really important to their desire to remain part of a team and feel valued.
From Grace Simonillo Delamonte, what advice do you have? I mean, you started as a young man, as a leader in your 20s. What advice do you have for young professionals just at the start of their career?
I've hit on some leadership themes throughout, but one that I didn't, that I would say, you know, I would absolutely not be where I am without this. It is the importance of your network. And you never know who that you know from whatever walk of life, growing up, school, professionally, when someone's going to come back into your orbit and what role they're going to play. And always treating people as you want to be treated or as they want to be treated. I know it sounds like common sense, but I think fostering your network, staying engaged with your networks, is staying involved in communities, keeping up friendships. Those things absolutely matter. And I can say with 100% certainty, I would not be where I am today without that. I think that's true of really every opportunity I've had. But then I'd say the other side of that coin is you can know all the people in the world. If you haven't made the right investments in yourself, then you're not going to be able to capitalize on those opportunities. And that doesn't mean law school like it did for me, but you know, whatever you're passionate about and want to do, you know, keep learning about it, keep volunteering in organizations that have some impact on it. So I think between keeping your network warm and engaged and investing in yourself, and a lot of times those two things overlap, they will continue to have benefits. And it's hard to say when or how, but that's how most things end up happening. And those I would say are the two most important pieces.
One last question before we let everybody go. And I do have some thank yous when you're done, so everybody stay tuned. Jason, why Columbus? What is it about the business environment here that brought Brewdog, and why a lot of people have been so successful here?
Yeah, I'm fortunate that I'm from here, so I'm also biased. But I think I was born in a place where it's especially unique in the Midwest, where there's a general sense that the brightest days of Columbus are ahead of it, not behind it. And I think for a lot of Midwestern cities, that isn't how people feel. So what drives that? I think Columbus has made a lot of good decisions over the years. It happens to be home of Ohio State, which is a big engine for obviously academics, but also innovation. The things that the city has done historically with the public-private partnerships, I think have been really, really hugely impactful for the future of the city. I think it's a progressive city, which is important in my eyes, at least. But Brewdog picked Columbus. There's really, I'll make this quick because I know we're out of time. Two things. One, when they were touring the US and looking at cities to build a brewery in, every time they land in a city, James would tweet out, "We're in Columbus. What bar should we go to?" And different cities received them differently. And when he did that in Columbus, in 15 minutes, he got 200 replies with people telling him where he should go, why he should go. And it was just a very engaged craft beer community. So that was a huge part of how Columbus was picked. But the other is just the geographically, if you're a distribution company like we are, you're within 80% of the population within a day's drive. And the city was very, very aggressive about recruiting, and having a city that really wants to bring opportunity and businesses to the region is important. And Columbus gets and should get a lot of credit for that.
Well, Brent, this has been illuminating. We appreciate so much your being our kickoff to our local leader series. Couldn't have been a better person to do that. So thank you very much for the time. I want to thank Sam Metcalf from the city of Bexley for helping us put together the framework so that we could bring you this webinar today. Certainly thanks to everyone at the Chamber office, Elaine and Tracy. Thanks so much for all your work to put this together. Brent Solar, who at Solar Insurance Agency that sponsored us today. It has been, as I say, informative for everyone. And we're looking forward to future events. We hope that you'll be part of that, and that we'll keep you informed. You'll get an email from us talking about the next in the series. But again, we couldn't have been happier to have Jason with us for the kickoff of this series. Again, Jason, thanks so much. Last words to you.
I just want to say thanks, everyone. I appreciate people taking time out of their day, and happy to take part in these in the future, and look forward to seeing many people who are on this call sit in this seat.
Well, and we'll look to see everyone, no matter whether you sit in the seat or not, at a Brewdog near you very soon. So again, Jason, thanks so much, and we'll see everybody in our next webinar.